You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. This is Force 13 Live. The breaking news is that potential Tropical Cyclone 8 has formed in the Eastern Atlantic, and you're looking at it now. The National Hurricane Center thinks it will become a tropical storm in the next 12 hours, and rightfully so. Tropical storm warnings are in effect for the southernmost of the Cabo Verde Islands. Those islands are Santiago, Fogo, and I forget the name of the third island, which has just disappeared from my screen. I will get onto that just a minute. Florence is still a tropical storm at this time, but likely re-intensification will ensue. The Cape Verde Islands warnings, Santiago, Fogo and Brava are the islands that are under the warning right now. So those are the southernmost islands of the chain, and you can see the storm track there from the National Hurricane Center, expected to take it to the west-northwest and then a little bit of a curve later on. There is a remarkable amount of things to discuss at the moment. I anticipate that I'll be here for an hour. Just me at the minute. My name's Nathan Foy. I'm talking to you from the UK. This is the latest from our HQ, showing everything that's going on around the world. There is a lot. So also in the last hour, an hour ago, Tropical Storm Mangkhut was named. We should be able to show that on the screen actually, if I can just get everything together. This is what Mangkhut has been looking like in the last few hours. A little bit of choppy imagery there from the Himawari 8 satellite, but it's very close, about 90 miles from Eniwetok, I think it was called. One of the small island atolls, part of the Marshall Islands, the last island that the storm will encounter before it reaches the Mariana Islands. So we're looking at that right now as well. But let's start from the beginning, and we do actually begin with Mangkhut actually, but let's just show you everything else first. Hopefully this button works. Okay, here I am. Hello. You can see all of the satellite images, the Western Pacific on the top left hand side. You can see Mangkhut dominating the southeastern part of that image there. The Eastern Pacific, the first thing you'll notice over there is Hurricane Olivia. That is moving ever so slightly north of west still, and you can also see that other system behind it, 92E, which could develop into the next named storm. 60% chance in the next 48 hours. I'm not sure what the 5-day is on that, but I expect that that's an even higher percentage chance. It is 90% in the next 5 days, so they're pretty much saying it's going to happen. On the top right hand side you can see the Atlantic Ocean from afar, I suppose, from the GOES 16 satellite. As I watch it with you, you can see Florence towards the top of that image. As day broke, you can see it there, still quite a bit sheared, but it is holding its own. And you can see the other two systems to the southeast, sort of towards the right hand side of the image. And 93L, which is now potential Tropical Cyclone 8, is the furthest back, the one that just left the African continent. There's another look at Mangkhut. You can see the floater images here all compiled together. The water vapor at the top left hand side, it's been gathering momentum. It's a very broad system, probably the broadest of all of them at the minute, and that one is going to be a very strong typhoon no matter which way you look at it. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center put out their first forecast last night, and you can see here, well, there's that again. I just want to show it on this panel. You can see that since the first forecast, there's not much changed from the first forecast. They're up to number 3 now, but on the first forecast, when it was 25 knots, I believe, it said that it would be at 135 knots in 5 days. And from a 25 to 135 knots, for them to be so confident in that, I'm not sure I've seen that happen from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center before. To give you a little bit of perspective, not a great analogue, I know, but Haiyan, its first update, had the storm being at 120 knots on day 5. But there we go. And there is the potential for even further strengthening beyond that, but who knows how strong this storm's going to get. It's got a lot of time to do it in, and it's got baking hot waters to do it in as well. I'll be able to take your questions in this hour as well. I'm just going to get through all of the information I've got on these screens first of all before I start to deviate. So this is the latest advisory. I believe this is completely up to date, 11 AM. Atlantic Standard Time, 65 miles an hour, and you can see the cone continues to shift ever more towards the west. And if you start to look at this one, you start to wonder, is the storm going to make that curve or not? And if you continue to look at it, and if you compare it to previous forecasts, you know that the cone is getting further and further away to the south of Bermuda, and further and closer towards the eastern seaboard of the United States. That's day 5, the end of that forecast cone, 8 AM Wednesday. They expect Florence to be a Category 4 by that time. This can change a lot. Don't forget the National Hurricane Center thought that it would only go down to Category 2 after its first peak, and they were completely wrong about that, just as they were about its intensification phase. Not hitting on the NHC though, that is something that all of the models didn't see very well, and the National Hurricane Center using their best abilities in forecasting, but Florence continues to elude them for the time being. They do expect it to retain tropical storm intensity for the next 3 dots there. That takes us to 8 PM Saturday and early hours of Sunday when it becomes a hurricane again, according to them. I think it could be a little bit sooner than that, given how it has stopped weakening. So that could happen sooner. Anything could happen with this storm, quite frankly. We'll take a proper look in a moment at those model runs. Here's Olivia. Look at this. Hawaii is in the cone again. And a lot of the models have been saying this as well. We did show you briefly earlier the percentage chances in the next 5 days. Those have probably risen quite a lot since we wrote that. But 5 AM Wednesday, you can see how close the storm is to the islands. But don't forget, the cone is there for a reason, and that depicts where the center of the storm could pass. So the center of the storm could pass all the way up to the very edge of that cone, and every once in a blue moon they're wrong with that cone as well, completely. Once in a blue moon only. But you can see there Hawaii is probably going to get some sort of watches or warnings issued at some point. It's something we definitely need to watch as well. So there is the potential for 3 or 4 different risks. I mean, we've already got one right now with the Cabo Verde Islands. You've got 92L with the Lesser Antilles and the Caribbean later down the road. Florence and the eastern United States. Olivia with Hawaii. Norman just passed without incident. And then you have Mangkhut and what it could do to the Mariana Islands and beyond. And also on top of that, 1 or 2 models, in fact the GFS, thinking that one of the invests, I didn't get its number, I think it might be 98, might be a different one, might form near Taiwan. We'll look at that shortly as well. There's another look at the latest information for potential Tropical Cyclone 8, which has just been declared at 11 AM Atlantic Standard Time, 13.1 north, 17.8 west, according to the National Hurricane Center. With winds of 35 miles an hour, they expect it to be a tropical storm before the close of today, and therefore the first to get a name out of those 2 invests that are down there lurking. Now, this is probably what a lot of people are interested in right now. Tropical Storm Florence and the models. This is the model spread, an ensemble of many different models. I believe there's 24 different scenarios depicted on this screen. anywhere ranging from South Carolina to the northeast of the United States, to staying out at sea, doing a loop in between the East Coast and Bermuda. One or two, only one or two, going for a straightforward recurve out to sea scenario. So you would say that there is no straightforward scenario when it comes with Tropical Storm Florence. Odds are 90% chance that this storm will not recurve out to sea, at least not in the normal way. Now it could do a loop, like a lot of those ensembles are saying, but still stay out to sea. It could do a loop out at sea and then go and affect Atlantic Canada. Or it could stay further to the south and go on to affect the Outer Banks of North Carolina, or even further into North Carolina towards the west, or even into South Carolina, as that one ensemble member is saying. Can't discount it completely, but a very low chance at this time. Or for it to affect the Delmarva Peninsula, or for it to go up to New Jersey, or to Long Island, or a mixture of these scenarios. A lot of different scenarios depicted on these graphics. A lot of things could happen, and we really can only take it 1 or 2 days at a time, and that's what we will be doing for as long as we're tracking Florence, I suppose. But that is just another look at what we're expecting models wise. And here's another one for our Caribbean interests. Invest 92L. The Caribbean's certainly not out of this at all. I would speculate here that the models that keep it further south do have a weaker storm, especially those ones that are taking it as far south as Barbados. The GFS takes it into St. Lucia, and 1 or 2 of the other models there calling for a partial recurve through the Lesser Antilles and then towards Puerto Rico. A bit like a Maria track, but not a Maria intensity, we hope. And quite a lot of the models just taking it on a very sharp bend towards the north halfway through its progression. Not so sure about that scenario. This is Olivia. You can see how a lot of the models are taking it towards the islands. At what intensity is the key question. And you would say there at least a half chance of the Hawaiian Islands getting something, eventually, out of Olivia. Even if it is, at the minimum, some light breezes and heavy rainfall. But it could be tropical storm force winds. I very much doubt it would be a hurricane by that point, especially when it dips to the south. Suggests weakening to me. But that is the scenario out in play for Olivia. So, as a matter of fact, with the tropical storm watch that was in effect in one of those Marshall Islands atolls, and also with the threat of the Mariana Islands being affected by Typhoon Mangkhut, I believe I'm right in saying there are 4 storms that are going to be affecting United States territories in the next 10 days, if you count Puerto Rico in that, and the Virgin Islands, of course. So, a lot of areas that could be under threat from up to 4 storms in US territory. I just want to try and get an update from Guam about the latest information on the storm, just to make sure all of our information is correct. A new update is out, and a tropical storm watch remains in effect for Eniwetok Atoll. So they haven't upgraded it to a warning, even though it's only about 100 miles away. I'm surprised by that. I thought they would have been updating it to a warning. The next update from Guam is going to be later on in the morning local time, about 6 hours from now. 4 hours. 4 hours from now. That update literally just dropped in the last minute. So that was good timing. Let's see what else is on this screen here. So as we've been looking, this is the presentation of all of the current systems that are active right now. There are a lot. The remnants of Gordon somehow are still alive. 10 miles per hour, according to the Weather Prediction Center. They're doing the updates, and surely it's not going to last much longer. As you can see, it's perched over Arkansas at the minute. Florence out there, it doesn't look great when you look at it from this perspective. The Invest 92L, 90%, pretty much guaranteed to form, looks good as well. And PTC 8 on the right hand side looks even better. The East Pacific, that's 60% chance 92E, 90% in the next 5 days. There's Olivia. Norman, I don't know how it's holding on to hurricane status. Somehow it is. The West Pacific, look, it was 90W, I think, that might go on to intensify and become something east of the Philippines. And 98W, you may have noticed last night, had a high chance, and now it's down to low. This is what everyone is probably interested in as well. These percentages are probably a little bit out of date now, but these were what we were looking at for tropical storm conditions in the next 10 days. My hunch is that those percentage chances are probably significantly higher now. I've just not had time to update the graphics, but if you watch what we'll likely be doing another live stream later today in the evening, we'll probably have updated numbers on these, so watch that space. And just an idea of what the rest of the eastern seaboard looked like there. Yeah, up to 15% chance, but that is just out of uncertainty because we really don't know where exactly the storm is going to go. We anticipate that later on in the life of Florence, that the possibilities will congregate and the cone of uncertainty, of course, will decrease, and those percentage chances will culminate, and it could become a very significant storm. We wait and see on that. This is Hawaii for Olivia. As I noted, those percentage chances are probably much higher as well, so the only one that's probably still relevant right now is Invest 92L on these graphics. These are the percentage chances, around 20%, 1 in 5 chance for a lot of those islands. And again, that is another one. Once the models home in on where exactly the storm is going to impact, those percentage chances will increase markedly. So that's everything on there right now. Let's see if we can take any comments. I know a lot have come in during the first parts of the stream. Start your question if you're watching live. You can send a message. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. It will light up big and bright for me. Only 1 or 2 have done that so far, so I'll wait for some more. But whilst I do that, there was a comment earlier saying nice things, saying that we are great. That's fantastic, and helping them make a lot of informed decisions over the last 2 years since Matthew. And as I'm sure you recall, during Matthew, that was a complete marathon of coverage, and I do anticipate that something similar may occur during Florence. Let me just see if there's anything else that I can pick out here. What are we forecasting Mangkhut's peak to be? Very good question. I might go and take a look at some models for you for that in just a moment. What is the chance Olivia will thread the big island and the one next to it? I'm not entirely sure what that question means. Whether it will impact both of them? I've no idea. Please rephrase. Poor Japan and Hawaii can't take a break from hurricanes and typhoons. To be fair, Mangkhut will probably not impact Japan. Not at the moment from what we're seeing. And EB Gaming rightly says there's not a 100% chance that Florence will impact the East Coast. Rough surf will occur, but a landfall cannot be ruled out. Certainly not. And I'm just going to go back to some of those other graphics whilst I go and grab some model runs. What shall I leave you with for the time being? We'll leave you with this from Florence. These are what all the ensembles are saying for the time being, and you can see, you know, don't look at one single track out of these. That would be cherry picking. You've got to consider the whole picture, and you can't disregard that still half of those models at least are calling for that curve away from the US late on in that run, but it is very speculative still at this stage. Alright, we do have some questions. Why has the Atlantic exploded in the last few weeks? Well, this sort of thing has been coming for quite a while, actually. We saw it in the middle to late part of August that the long-range models that indicate conductivity towards tropical cyclones were at first saying that the West Pacific would die and that East Pacific and Atlantic would liven up in mid to late September. It sort of, as we were looking at the MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation, we saw later on in the last week or so that it was being very centralized, and that is part of the reason why we're seeing all of these systems distributed across the board, across both hemispheres. But it is September in the Atlantic. I feel personally that we're looking at a very similar setup right now to 1996. Hank said in the show last night that it's a very similar scenario to 2002. And both of those years had very interesting storms, some impactful storms. In 2002 it was Lily and Isidore. And in 1996, which I think is a better analogue personally, we had a lot of storms ranging from Edouard, which Florence could do at Edouard, which stayed out to sea mostly, I believe. And then you had Fran, which a lot of people remember, impacted the US East Coast as a major hurricane. Florence could also do that, by the way. And then you had Gustav, I believe, that year. I can't remember exactly what that one did. I was looking at it last night, but all the information's going wishy-washy over here. And then you had Hortense as well. One of those storms went and impacted Nova Scotia in the end as a hurricane. But there were a lot of intense storms. Gustav was actually a weak storm in the east. A weak storm that stayed out to sea, and that 93L, which is now PTC 8, could end up being very similar to Gustav, maybe a little bit stronger than that. So that is a very interesting mirror almost that we've got at the moment to 1996, which personally I think is the best analogue for what the current situation we're looking at is. Alright, let's see if we can put this onto the screen now. It might take just a moment or two whilst I configure it. Do bear with me. And this is usually what all of our team does, but I can do it on this occasion, showing all the different model runs from Tropical Tidbits on what they're all saying. So this is the GFS. You can see it going through the run here, down to 911 millibars just off the coast of Guam. But the GFS does have a terrible reputation of blowing up all of these storms massively, and watch what happens next. Oh wonderful, taking it down into the 860s. 867 according to the 6C run, and it's been saying silly things like that for quite a while. And I did note one or two people on Twitter saying that the GFS is literally trash these days. Well, we're not going to say 867 is going to happen, but what we can tell you is that a very strong typhoon is in the offing. And you can also see there that other system forming off Taiwan, and that possibly reaching typhoon strength as well briefly before moving into China. So ignore the pressures, but you could quite safely say that we're looking at a Category 5 hurricane as it moves through the Philippine Sea there, according to the GFS. On the right hand side you can see what looks like remnants of Olivia possibly moving in towards 180 east, and it doesn't look like anything will come of that. And very late on in that run, ridiculously late, I'd ignore it if I were you, but possibly another system forming. You can't put that past the Western Pacific at any time of year. That's the GFS. The ECMWF is looking at something similar, I think. What was it saying? This is coming into now, yes. You can see a very strong system impacting very close to Guam, just south again, similar agreement with the GFS, and then really blowing up as it moves off towards the northwest, and then even stronger as it goes into Taiwan. I was just looking for the pressure by that point. 930s. Now that is a lot more believable. It could even be stronger than that, you know, but ECMWF calls for strengthening all the way up until landfall, which is very curious indeed. Not sure what intensity we're looking at there, at least Category 4 I would suggest, into Taiwan, and still a typhoon by the time it reaches China. Just looking whether it developed that other system, very weak off the coast of Taiwan there, but could be a minimal tropical storm according to the ECMWF model. And again you can see the remnants of Olivia on the right hand side very late on in that run. That's for the US as well, the FV3. We'll go to that shortly. The CMC, oh gosh. Well, we don't ever look at CMC for developing for new storms, but we can take a look at it at least for what it thinks Mangkhut will do. It actually takes it into Saipan. And then, again, agreement here, so a common ground in that further intensification happens after the Mariana Islands. And then off towards, actually through the Luzon Strait there, and could deal something towards Hong Kong. And another system behind it. The Navgem, again, a similar story. It's scary the amount of agreement that we're seeing amongst all of these models. After the Mariana Islands, more strengthening by 20 millibars going to the Navgem, which is no mean feat as far as that model is concerned. The Icon. Well, staying very weak for some reason. I would completely disagree with that. That's a partial run coming out from 12Z. Let's just grab the 6Z whilst we're looking at it. It actually had the storm much stronger at 6. And down into the 940s. Again, the trend is there again after passing Guam. Further intensification. And a sneaky little system moving just off the coast of China and Hong Kong, Macau there as well. JMA model. You can see it again here. Moving through. That is... I don't know, there's not much of a run there. And that's all of them for the Western Pacific. Let's just go and grab the FV3 GFS because it does show the Atlantic, just to show you what it is showing for Florence. So you can see it again moving onto the screen here into the 950s in terms of millibars, and then swiping the Outer Banks, moving very close to land. It doesn't actually make a landfall there, and then right out to sea. That is one very possible scenario that you could see from Florence. Let's just get the region properly set. The North Atlantic. I should have done this earlier. Let's just see what this particular model was saying. You can see 93, which is now 8, PTC 8, moving through the Cape Verde Islands there and then moving out to sea. And also 92L there. And you know, both of those storms could play a part in what Florence does as well. It really could. And actually, 92L getting cut off there and staying. Oh no, not another Nadine, we hope. That's just one model run. The ECMWF, let's see what it's saying. That's the end of the run and something lurking in the Caribbean there. Let's just go back to the beginning and look at the sea level pressure. There's Florence again, moving towards the US coast. ECMWF takes it right into land now, on the border between the Carolina states, and then inland and dissipating inland. Behind that, 92L, affecting the Lesser Antilles as a Category 1 by the looks of things, possibly maybe a little stronger, and then going to affect Haiti. 93L, I should start getting into the habit of calling it Potential Tropical Cyclone 8, staying very weak. The normal GFS, which I think we may well be familiar with. Florence there, moving through, affecting the Outer Banks, actually up Chesapeake Bay there. And then out near Long Island and stalling. So that's another very curious predicament there. Another scenario that we're looking at. None of these scenarios can be taken as fact. It's really skeptical to even call them speculation. As we look at the CMC again. Stalling along the coast. My goodness. I think that was it indeed. One scenario on that, on those ensembles earlier. the navgem. Blowing Florence up very close to Bermuda, actually. Still calling for a bit further north there. And the JMA model, which again is incomplete. I'm not sure what's going on with that one. The HWRF as well. Let's show you what it's saying for Florence right now from the beginning to end. You can see how it's going along. Strengthening, strengthening, category 4. Strong category 4. There's the end of it. That is wind at the 850 millibar level, so ignore that it's saying 170 knots. That's not surface. It's really only a mid-range category 4 in that picture there. That's very close in. I want to try and get the outer view for... that's the image that we used earlier. Let's just get this view here for the Himawari. Not Himawari, HWRF. What am I talking about? HWRF. This is what Florence looks like here. You can see that is pretty much the same thing that we just saw translated into this graphic. So that's what it says on Florence. Let's see what it gets for potential tropical cyclone 8, a brief hurricane. 92 becomes a category 4 as well in the central Atlantic. That is one of the most aggressive runs. And let's go to its sister, the HMON, to take a look at what it says for Florence. This is the last one we're doing in the models here. And again, calling for a category 4, 150 miles an hour for Florence in that intermediate phase. And let's just see what it says for 92. Oh, that's the wind shear graphic. Nowhere near as strong. Barely a tropical storm for 92L according to the HMON. They are like the yin and yang, these two models, quite often. And the wind swath for 93L there, I don't buy that at all. I'm much more inclined to believe the National Hurricane Center's forecast for a tropical storm that will continue to move towards the northwest and end up possibly going out to sea. So I think I've shown you pretty much everything I can from my desk right now in terms of what everything that's going on. And this is a live look at what Florence looks like right now. Let's just try and get an updated loop of this. This is 1 minute imagery from the GOES 16 satellite, and here it is again. Just allowing the whole loop to load here. And there's the full loop showing how Florence has been developing in those last few frames. You can just see the southern part expanding. Maybe wind shear starting to let go a little bit now, allowing Florence some breathing room. Alright, I'm sure there's been a lot more questions in the time that I've been looking at all of those models. Let's see what we've got. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. I can clear up any confusion if there is any. Will Florence make a category 3 landfall? That is a ridiculous question to be asking at this time, because asking me is like asking anyone. You'll get a different answer from everyone, I expect. Anything can happen with this storm. Almost anything at all. You think back to a lot of the historical analogues. I know someone mentioned Hugo earlier on. It's not going to be a Hugo storm. That is one you can rule out because Hugo was much further south than Florence. But you're talking about a Fran type storm, or an Isabel, or some of the very historic storms. I know that it was mentioned to me by one of our team members, the Chesapeake Bay Hurricane in 1933. I believe that one weakened quite a lot before landfall. What is notable is the sea surface temperatures off the coast of the US right now. I can't bring them to you at this time, but I am of the belief that those temperatures are quite high, and certainly enough to sustain a tropical cyclone pretty much until landfall. Let's just take some more questions here. I think there are some. about Olivia. Yes, a silly comment that someone posted earlier. Say that it was, I don't know. A major hurricane landfall cannot be ruled out, says EB Gaming. Yes, a major. I mean, we got to say a major hurricane landfall cannot be ruled out. You're talking about those analogs before, but there's quite a few analogs that kept the storm out to sea as well, and that's what you're looking at on your image right now. There seems to be a distinct split there between those two groups of models. These are all different model runs. These are only 24. There's actually a lot more than that in reality. This is a simplified look, if you will. And you can see virtually half of them have the storm doing a massive U-turn off the US coast, and another half take it onshore pretty much, the eastern seaboard of the United States. And you saw all those different models earlier saying a wide variety of scenarios. The ECMWF, which has a very good reputation, actually calling for a landfall on the border between South and North Carolina, which is fascinating. If you've just joined us, let's go back to the track maps just to make everyone aware of the basics. This is potential Tropical Cyclone 8, which has just formed in the Atlantic Ocean, very close to the African coast, likely to become a tropical storm before impacting the Cabo Verde Islands, where tropical storm warnings are in effect. It's got a 90% chance of developing into a storm or into a tropical cyclone. A tropical storm warning is in effect for Santiago, Fogo and Brava. Those are islands in Cape Verde. This is Olivia. You can see the forecast track for Olivia, a Category 3 at 8 AM Pacific Daylight Time, still 115 miles an hour. Calling for gradual motion just north of west, and then maybe a little curve in towards Hawaii towards the end of that loop. So that is something we've got to be watching very closely next week, just as we're watching everything else. This is Florence. And you can see the next 48 hours there is having the storm moving pretty much due west. And then a little northward element gets introduced as we get into Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And then major hurricane status on Tuesday, the National Hurricane Center anticipates. That could happen quicker than anticipated, by the way. It already happened once. It could happen again. But the weakening was also not expected. Looking at the storm right now, I don't think it's going to weaken anymore. But if it does, then we don't know whether that's good news or not, because we're already looking at potential major hurricane impacts somewhere along the US East Coast. When you look at that last image, the last dot on that forecast track, 8 AM Wednesday, 130 miles an hour the National Hurricane Center put it at by then. And the rest is in a massive gulf of uncertainty there along the east coast of the US, anywhere from South Carolina to the northeastern states, really, Massachusetts, Cape Cod, and possibly even Atlantic Canada in the very long range. And now we're back to Mangkhut, which you can also see likely to impact Guam. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center thinks it could do that with winds of 130 miles per hour possibly. That storm will intensify significantly, but if you think it's going to intensify quickly before the islands, all of the models that we just saw say that most of the intensification will happen after the islands, when it enters the Philippine Sea. That's what we'll be watching very closely when it comes to Mangkhut. If it's already a Category 4 by the time it's reaching the Mariana Islands, we don't know yet, then goodness knows how it will be when it enters the Philippine Sea. And you're back with me, and you can see the latest imagery there of Mangkhut, how it has been developing, a very broad system, very close to the very small atoll of I keep forgetting its name. It's a very tricky one. Enewetak, I believe it was. Enewetak. Probably butchering the name pronunciation every time. 100 miles from Bikini Atoll, and roughly the same, maybe a little bit more, from Enewetak Atoll as well. Tropical storm watch for that place in particular. No other warnings for Mangkhut. And this is the wide view of everything else that's going on right now as we look at it. So I'm with you for another 20 minutes talking about everything and taking your questions, because we're here to serve, of course. So let's see what else we've got. What's your expectations on potential Tropical Cyclone 8? What is the peak in your opinion? Having looked at the models, I would expect that it's going to be a tropical storm, possibly minimal hurricane as it moves off towards the northwest. Apart from the Cape Verde Islands, I don't think it's going to affect any other land areas. We'll wait and see. Anthony Ramos says, are the conditions in the Southern Caribbean favourable or unfavourable for 92L? What I will do is pull up the sea surface temperature charts, because I think we will benefit greatly from looking at them properly. So I'm just about to bring you the latest, but because it's only me working here, it will take a few minutes, because I can't do 110 things at once. So let's take a look and see if we can look at this right now. Not there, but maybe here. This is the US East Coast. And you can see the current sea surface temperatures there, almost as I said, if at least if we're referring to the East Coast as far as the Delmarva Peninsula there. Sea surface temperatures are more than enough. You're even getting 29, getting towards 30 degrees along that Gulf Stream tongue that's always present. I'm trying to find Bermuda on this graphic. I can't see it. It is there. It must be there somewhere on the right hand side. But when you get up towards New Jersey, the sea surface temperatures drop like a rock. About 24, 26. 26 begins in southern New Jersey. So southern New Jersey, you can theoretically have a storm maintaining its intensity. A lot of other factors are involved. That's just one look. Here's another look. This is North America. So that's a wider shot there. The Caribbean is very warm, as it always is. Just trying to find out what temperature that actually is. We're looking at there 28 over Jamaica, 29 around the Cayman Islands and Cuba. The Gulf of Mexico is warm as well, by the way. And one or two models earlier last night were suggesting that 92L may well even stay weak and develop in the Bay of Campeche. That could be a very long-term scenario as well. That is a very unlikely one at the minute, but it is one of the huge amount of scenarios. But as you saw on some other models, some of the models are taking 92L away from the Caribbean and being under the influence, in a way, of Florence. So that is a very complex situation. We always say this, but I think this is one of the most complex situations that I have seen. Looking at the world now for these sea surface temperatures. Left hand side is Hawaii. Around 27 degrees Celsius there over the Hawaiian Islands. Warm enough waters all the way for Olivia pretty much. Although I think where it is right now, it's just about riding the periphery of that 26 degree line. Looking at the Atlantic. Don't forget, September, by the way, is the most active month in the Atlantic Ocean. It's also the month in which sea surface temperatures are warmest in the Atlantic Ocean, even outside of the tropics. For instance, even here in the UK, the sea surface temperatures are getting up towards 18 degrees, which is just about the peak and then it drops again. So September is the warmest month for sea surface temperatures, even though it's not usually the warmest month for temperatures on land. So when you're talking about a Florence or any East Coast situation, September is the worst month to get it, because the sea surface temperatures are most in favour. And just in case anyone's asking why PTC 8 won't be any stronger than what we're expecting, which is tropical storm or minimal hurricane if lucky, it's expected to move northwest, and especially after Florence, temperatures are just not supportive of a tropical cyclone northeast of the Cabo Verde Islands. 25, maybe even down to 24 in one or two places there. So if it does go that way, it will have a hard time. 92L will have a much easier time though. Western Pacific, here's another look here. You see one or two little upwelling channels there towards Japan. No prizes for guessing where that came from. Jebi, of course, causing a lot of coolness there. But further south, Mangkhut will probably not be over any of those cooler waters. Towards Guam, temperatures around 28, 29 degrees. Towards the Philippines, the same, 28 or 29. I'll just take that off the screen again and leave you just for a moment with the latest track map for Florence, just so that you can take another proper look at that. And just to detail that the center of the storm can pass anywhere within that cone. The center of the storm can move anywhere within that cone in the next 5 days. So, if it was going along the very northern periphery of that cone, Bermuda could be in with a shot of tropical storm conditions, and you'd be thinking more towards the northeasternmost states. It could even track amongst the southern edge of that periphery. And if that was the case, then you're sort of looking towards southern South Carolina and maybe even further south, but no models think that's going to happen. It is quite interesting that the cone is as south as it is actually, because it is a little bit south of the model consensus. What I'm going to try to bring to you in a minute or two are the model outputs side by side on the RAM graphics. Probably didn't make much sense what I just said, but I'm going to try and get a whole host of different model data products to you if they are available for the system in question. So here is one of them. This is Invest 92L. So you can see what the track, pretty straightforward across the central Atlantic. It's beyond 5 days that we're struggling, but that is what the 5-day forecast is saying. HWRF calling for a borderline category 4 on day 5. The CTCX is not that far behind. The SHIPS model, which ironically, even though it's a statistical model, was the most accurate when it came to Florence, at least at its first peak. It's just a fluke. It's saying category 2. The LGEM, category 1. The GFS, which notably underestimates everything on these charts, or has done recently. It always overestimates pressure but underestimates actual winds, and it's saying borderline category 1. And the HMON, which sometimes just goes for a walk half the time and just says, nope, I'm not doing anything for this storm, is only saying a mid-range tropical storm. I think future runs of the HMON may say differently. But then you've got on the right hand side, the top right hand panel, which is slightly cut off, that's the wind shear. And you can see generally it's low to moderate for the next 5 days. Not bad conditions at all. Sea surface temperatures 27 to 28 degrees, not bad at all. Relative humidity around 60%, fair. I'm just bringing, every time the screen goes off I'm trying to get another one up on the screen. So this now is PTC 8. which of course is now a potential tropical storm, potential tropical cyclone. The HWRF is the most bullish out of them, predicting a weak hurricane. And out of those models, you know, it is a bit further south of that, of those lower sea surface temperatures, so it'll probably get away with it. And general steady strengthening is predicted by a lot of those models there. What you can see towards the end of that model run, on the top right hand panel, the wind shear panel, wind shear is going to go through the roof towards the 5-day mark. And that may be because of other storms' influence, or it could be something more indirect. Sea surface temperatures there, as you can see as we discussed, HWRF actually takes it slightly below the 26 mark. Relative humidity not too bad. So that's PTC 8. As we shift back to Florence again there. I also have to report that Invest 94L has formed. And this is a very curious thing. This is the latest RAM image of Invest 94L. This one is located not far from Bermuda, just to the southwest. Now, this hasn't appeared on any tropical advisories from the National Hurricane Center as far as I'm aware. So I'm not sure why it's been designated as an invest, because it's not even depicted at all on the National Hurricane Center's website. So that is someone just to be mindful. That is one just to be mindful of as well. Now maybe they've tagged it because it will be in play when we're talking about Florence's movement. It could determine Florence's movement. So maybe that's why they've designated it as an invest. Not much to say about Norman, but here it is. There it is in relation to Hawaii. It's missing. We did wonder whether it would make that turn as it has, but it has. Wind shear is now getting up towards 40 knots. So it's going to be a complete capitulation very soon. It's already occurring. Trying to get Hurricane Olivia onto the screen now, which obviously is of interest to Hawaiian interests. Here it is. You can see all the different models spread, and pretty much all of them calling for that curve towards the south. I did look at one or two models recently, and the GFS, at the very least, calling for a rainmaker from Olivia, and you could see another 25 inches plus on the big island of Hawaii. That's just a speculative estimate from the GFS long range. But you can see there, massive drop in intensity towards the end of that run. One of those that could end up just completely dying as it reaches the islands in the face of high wind shear, but sea surface temperatures on the rise as well towards the end there, so it can't be completely ruled out. And it could definitely distribute tropical storm conditions. If you're wondering about Invest 92E, don't, because it's going to stay out to sea and not be a particularly strong storm. So that's just a quick look at 92E. Do we have Mangkhut? Yes. Here's the latest showing of Mangkhut. HWRF just short of Category 5. CTCX pretty much going for Category 5. JTWC probably wanted to say Cat 5. And the GFS putting it up to Category 4 by the end of that run. If you're lucky, you might just be able to see Guam and the Mariana Islands in the bottom left-hand panel. And wind shear will be on a slight rise and then it will fall again. This storm is one to worry about. And where's Florence? I'll try and get Florence up on the screen as well, but at the minute I cannot retrieve it. Just a moment, I might have it now. Here is the latest on Florence. So you can see its progression so far in terms of winds on the top left hand panel and what the models are expecting. and there is a lot of agreement there for Category 4 by the time we get to day 5, and models are pretty tight-knit on that 5-day projection. So interesting that the National Hurricane Center forecast is a decent forecast. It is a decent forecast. Alright, I've waffled on for far too long with all of that. In the last 5 minutes, I'm going to take all of the questions that we've got right now. Is Mangkhut a girl's name? I've no idea, actually. A lot of the names over there in the Western Pacific are named after flowers or symbols or things that aren't gender specific. A lot of things came in that time, so I'm struggling to find everything. If in the last 5 minutes, start your message with Force 13 all in text, and I'll take any comments that come in at the last moment here, and I'll try and get them. But I was going to do something else, actually. It just reminded me. I'm going to try and get another graphic onto the screen shortly, but it'll have to wait a minute or two. But you can see there that Florence is what everyone is talking about right now, and you can see why. But let's not forget, there are 4 storms that are going to be, that could be affecting US territory in the next 5 days. I wanted to show, let's see here, the GFS run is coming in right now, and I just wonder if it's telling us anything. It's pretty, very interesting, actually. It's calling for potential Tropical Cyclone 8 to develop into a much stronger system in the Central Atlantic. So we'll see what that means. But I just want to go back to the 6C GFS run, which I can show here. There we go, properly. You may be familiar with this image. It's what Hank was showing us last night, and I think we may as well have an update on that. He was showing how the ridge was building in off the Atlantic coast, and you can see again the ridge building in there, that high pressure connecting with the other high pressure on the right hand side there, and it's a very frail link, it has to be said. There's a weakness building in over there near the Azores as Florence is moving around. That's what's pushing it south. It's very strong by this point, and now you can see that weakness coming in, and that may possibly deter some of these storms, or at least one of them. Yep, there goes PTC 8 moving up towards the north, and the high pressure system, according to the 6C GFS, just doesn't let Florence stay out to sea, pushes it inland, and then it appears to weaken later on, and then Florence is kept towards the US coast because of PTC 8, because the high pressure has been squeezed now towards the Azores. That's fascinating. And meanwhile, quietly, you've got the next system, 92L, staying pretty weak through the Caribbean, and maybe possible development in the Gulf later on, probably not. But that is pretty much what we're looking at. It all depends on this high pressure, part 1. Then it depends on what the other 2 systems do, and whether that high pressure builds into the east near the Azores later on. And that is why on the model ensembles you had that very tight looping and then moving off towards the south in some instances after it made its closest approach to the US, and that would be because not only of potential Tropical Cyclone 8, possibly Helene, but the high pressure that's keeping that storm further west as well. Let's see. Yep, just comments about 94L, nothing else in particular, so I can only assume I've answered the questions well. And only one about what statistical models are used for. Well, I guess statistical models are more towards climatological norms, what you would, what the climatology would expect from a system in whatever location it's in at the time. It isn't really, it can't really be taken seriously, because we have more aids than that. It's not the 1970s anymore, when that's what all they were using, or the 1960s. We have models that can predict how strong those high pressures are going to be, all of these variables that I've just been showing, and what's going to happen with its intensity, what's going to happen with wind shear, what's going to happen with dry air, as we saw earlier on those panels as well. Just a quick question there at the end. The further south Florence goes, the more strengthening will occur? Question mark. Yes and no. If it does stay further south, sea surface temperatures will be warmer later on, but in order to stay further south, it has to be weaker. If it was to strengthen right now, that cone could shift further north. If it doesn't strengthen right now and follows the National Hurricane Center's forecast, then it will be remaining weaker for longer, and that will give the okay for more vigorous strengthening later on in the model run as it's getting towards day 4 and 5. I think I've exhausted everything. I hope I've done a good job in explaining everything in this last hour. That's all from me. We'll have more updates tonight, probably at 9 PM UTC, which is 4 PM Eastern Time. Is that right? 5 PM, I'm sorry. 5 PM Eastern Time, I believe we're going to be doing our next live update, and we'll probably be running for 3 hours later on tonight. That's all for now, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching.